Ladies and gentlemen, wishing you a peaceful night full of rest and relaxation. Tonight we journey to the edge of a sunlit sea where marble glows warm beneath your sandals, and the smell of salt and scrolls rides the air like incense. This is ancient Alexandria, the intellectual capital of the world, a place where philosophers debate under fig trees and librarians hoard secrets like dragons. With parchment hoards, you walk slowly, past vendors selling honey-dipped figs, past mathematicians gesturing wildly with bits of chalk, past women in sheer linen robes balancing amphora with the poise of queens. It's beautiful, yes, but not exactly quiet. Ships groan in the harbor. Philosophers argue about whether the stars are gods or just rocks. A pigeon steals your bread. Welcome to the loudest place to try to get a good night's sleep. And yet here, amid the clamoring of minds and markets, one woman teaches with such serenity that students say her voice could calm a sandstorm. Her name is Hypatia, philosopher, mathematician, astronomer. Sleeper? Well, you'll see. Just don't expect to survive this syllabus. It's heavy on the Plato and light on the nap breaks. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the royal quarter, its white stone roads whispering beneath your feet. Ahead, the sea glimmers like molten bronze. Alexandria is no ordinary city. Built by order of Alexander the Great and ruled now by his cultural descendants, it's a port of dreams and conquests. You pass the towering Pharos Lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the world, flickering like a divine candle in the dusk. But the real miracle is the library. Even this early in the night, torches flicker outside its arched doorway. Inside, it's cooler. Scrolls line the walls like silent soldiers. Scribes murmur. Ink smells hang in the air like old wisdom. Somewhere in here, 400,000 works of knowledge sit waiting to be opened. More than any one mind could consume in 10 lifetimes. But Hypatia's trying. She's not here yet. She's still just a baby when you arrive. But her world is already unfolding. Her father, Theon of Alexandria, a noted mathematician and philosopher, is scribbling careful notes on the stars. You peek over his shoulder. He's trying to preserve Ptolemy's Almagest, a guide to the cosmos itself. The sky to Theon isn't chaos, it's geometry and motion, and soon he'll teach his daughter to see it that way too. Historians still argue whether Theon truly wanted a prodigy, or simply couldn't afford a son. Either way, Hypatia was born into formulas and philosophies, not lullabies. She'd be swaddled in star charts if she could. And no, she doesn't get bedtime stories. She gets Euclid. You slip through the city's different quarters. Greek, Egyptian, Roman. Alexandria's a mosaic of traditions, and the people wear togas, tunics, and the occasional jackal-headed festival mask. Religious tensions simmer quietly. Pagan temples hum with incense, while Christian preachers shout from street corners. The old gods are dying, the new ones still nervously clearing their throats. Down by the docks you pass fishermen mending their nets, softly humming to keep the sea gods content. You pause. That tune, it's a lullaby older than the pyramids. Nearby, a woman balances a jar on her head and casually debates Stoic philosophy with a date vendor. You smile. This city doesn't sleep, but it dreams awake. As moonlight spills across marble columns and temple steps, you settle on a bench carved with curling ivy. A cat curls up beside you, probably sacred, definitely judgmental. You think of Hypatia, not yet born but already inevitable, a girl who will walk these same stones, soft-footed and sharp-minded, who will learn to explain the movements of stars before most children learn to tie sandals. It's said that Alexandria at night smells like ink, sweat, and sea salt. Tonight, it smells like potential. You wander back toward the museum, the great center of learning attached to the library. Think less gallery, more Hogwarts for ancient nerds. Scholars live here. They debate, research, write, and occasionally duel with words, not swords. In the courtyard, someone's quietly charting the moon phases with a water clock. You glance up, the sky is clear, stars sparkle, ancient and unchanged. One of them has a name Hypatia will one day calculate the brightness of, centuries before telescopes. It's funny, isn't it? You're walking through a city that invented so many things: hydraulics, poetry, double-entry bookkeeping, and still no one's figured out how to turn the streetlights off. Alexandria is always on, the city that never naps. But soon someone will teach it to pause. Not because she'll conquer or command, because she'll speak softly, because her black robes will swish like whispers through the marble halls, because her mind will shine more brightly than the pharaoh's and be just as dangerous to look directly into. So close your eyes for a moment. Listen to the waves lap against the pier. In a few years, that newborn girl will rise with the sun and chart its arc across the sky, not to worship it, but to understand it. She'll walk these streets as both scientist and sage, leaving footprints in your path, quiet ones, the kind that don't disturb the dust, the kind that make even Alexandria pause. You wake to the gentle rhythm of water sloshing in clay jars, and the sun already high over Alexandria's skyline. Bronze-tipped obelisks and rooftop gardens basking in the morning glow. A breeze carries the aroma of baking bread, drying ink, and sun-warmed limestone. Somewhere nearby, a teacher is scolding a student for forgetting their syllogisms again. But today's not just any morning. Today, Hypatia is born. She arrives not with thunder or trumpets, but in the quiet back room of a scholar's villa, tucked between a cabinet of scrolls and a window that frames the sky. Her father, Theon, sets down his stylus only briefly. Even as the midwife cleans the newborn, Theon is muttering about planetary models. Parenting will be academic. Historians still argue whether Hypatia was born around 355 or closer to 370 CE. Even her birthday is blurred by time, like a stargazer squinting through morning fog. But it's clear she was born into a world ruled by letters and orbits, not lullabies. From the moment she can crawl, her nursery is a library. Theon doesn't tell fairy tales. He tells her how to divide a circle into 360 parts, and why the Earth isn't the center of the universe. And Hypatia listens, big-eyed and eerily quiet. Not because she's shy, because she's thinking. You shuffle through the family home. It smells of wax tablets and dusty mathematics. You pass a corner where miniature sundials line the wall like toys. There's a globe carved from ivory that wobbles gently when bumped. And tucked into a drawer, a baby-sized stylus, lovingly whittled by a father who never believed in waiting for school age. By the time most children are learning to count figs, Hypatia is mastering Pythagoras. She doesn't just recite numbers, she sees shapes inside them. You watch her trace spirals into sand with a stick explaining them to no one in particular. Her voice is soft, deliberate, soothing. Some say Theon homeschooled her, not out of love for her mind, but out of fear. In Alexandria, women weren't exactly encouraged to lead intellectual circles. Still, Theon nurtures her with the fervor of someone planting a tree he hopes will shade an empire. You follow them into the lecture courtyard. Theon teaches while Hypatia sits off to the side, until she doesn't. One day, she gently interrupts to correct an equation, and the students all turn, blinking. She's 11. You suppress a laugh. She's right, of course. She's always right. And while many girls her age are learning to embroider, Hypatia's learning to orbit. She studies the heavens, not because they're divine, but because they follow rules. Predictable, elegant rules. She's fascinated by what you can't touch but can measure, like a mind made visible. At night, father and daughter ascend the roof. Theon points with his staff. That's Sirius. Hypatia squints. It moved. And so begins her lifelong affair with the stars. Not as mystery, but as map. But Hypatia doesn't become merely a mirror of her father. She surpasses him. You can almost hear the whispered awe of students watching her speak. She doesn't raise her voice, one says, but you lean in without meaning to. She doesn't argue to win. She invites you to think alongside her. And somehow that's more disarming, more dangerous. A quirky detail. Hypatia is rumored to have crafted her own clothes. Robes cut in the style of male philosophers, but sewn from fine linen, always immaculately clean. A quiet rebellion you can wear. It said, I am equal. I am serious. Also, I look fantastic. By now, she's a teenager. You peek into her study. There's a globe on the desk, a chart of planetary retrogrades, and a cat curled on an open copy of Euclid's Elements. You resist the urge to scratch its ears. A scroll lies open beside her, filled with her own notes. Notations Theon can't stop reading with a proud smile. She's discovering her own way of understanding the universe, one that blends mathematics, philosophy, and what you might call stillness. Stillness becomes her signature. While the city buzzes with politics, traders, temple debates, and street performers, Hypatia sits unmoving beneath a fig tree, meditating on parabolas. Somehow, in this swirling mosaic of life, she creates a pocket of calm, a mental cocoon, a space for thought. And yet, she is not alone. Students begin to come to her, not just for math, but for how she thinks. She's barely out of childhood, but already exerts a gravitational pull. Historians still debate when exactly she began teaching. Some say in her teens. Others say not until she officially inherited her father's lectureship. Either way, it starts early, and with every scroll she masters, every new student who sits cross-legged at her feet, Hypatia becomes not just a daughter of Alexandria, but one of its minds. You stand again at the edge of the harbor. Ships rock gently. Torches flicker as the city begins to rest. In a small house not far from the library, a girl sleeps with a compass under her pillow and dreams of spheres spinning quietly in the dark. Not gods, not chaos, just beautiful, balanced circles, spiraling like lullabies through time. You wake to the lapping of water, rhythmic and soft, like Alexandria itself has decided to exhale. Somewhere, reeds rustle. Papyrus boats drift silently along narrow canals. And there, stepping delicately from stone to stone in sandals, barely touching the ground, is Hypatia, now almost grown. She's gliding through her day like a boat through calm tide waters. Early morning brings her to the harbor, where fishermen raise nets heavy with silver scales and city gossip. She barely glances at them. Her gaze is skyward. She's tracking Venus. Her father has stopped trying to catch up. He's been left, lovingly, in her intellectual wake. Hypatia now sails her own course, though she still returns home most nights to discuss the stars over lentils and flatbread. Historians still debate whether she ever formally left Alexandria in her youth. Some say she traveled to Athens. Others claim she remained planted, like a wise old olive tree, right in the museum courtyards where she was raised. What's certain is this: her mind traveled further than most armies ever would. She starts each day by rowing a small boat through the canal that snakes past the Serapeum, the great temple of Serapis, and once a center of pagan scholarship. You join her in the boat, watching as sunbeams dapple the water. She carries scrolls wrapped in linen, chalk, and a slate. Her hair is pinned simply, her robes dark and clean. The breeze picks up, and she hums something, probably not a lullaby, probably a geometric theorem disguised as a tune. She reaches the lecture hall, not at the Grand Library, but one of its satellite academies. Here, Hypatia teaches. No one forces her. No university diploma waits at the end. This is pure sharing, pure light. Students flock to her, some from across the Mediterranean. They're eager, fidgety, and mostly male, though a few bold women sit among them. Heads high. You find a shady spot under a fig tree where you can eavesdrop without disrupting the moment. She begins not with a greeting, but a question. What is the shape of falling water? No one answers at first. A bird chirps. Someone coughs. She smiles faintly and begins drawing in the dust with her stick. Her voice is low, steady, measured, like everything she does. It's as if she's tuning a lyre made of language. The students lean forward. Not because she's loud, because she isn't. She lectures in Greek, clear and poetic. Conic sections, parabolas, ellipses. She doesn't just teach how, they've got scrolls for that. She teaches why the universe is this shape and not another. You feel for a moment as if time itself could be graphed on her chalkboard. A quirky detail. She often teaches in the open air. Indoors is too loud, she says, too full of echoes. Under the sky, things make more sense. The cosmos can listen in. After the lesson, a student hands her a letter from a Roman official in Syria. It's a question about navigation by starlight. She tucks it away without fuss. This is her usual now. Lectures in the morning, letters from diplomats at lunch, philosophical debates over dates and wine at dusk. Later, she heads back through the city, refusing a chariot ride in favor of walking. Too fast, she murmurs. You miss the spirals and snail shells that way. You trail her past street musicians and candle makers, past temple ruins and olive presses. Everywhere she goes, people bow slightly or nod in recognition. Not everyone likes that a woman teaches with such authority, but most know better than to say so out loud. And then, the canals again, quiet, fragrant, reflective. She steps into her boat, alone but never lonely. The sky is streaked with oranges and blues. The stars wait, and so does her telescope. Historians still argue whether she invented or merely improved the astrolabe. Some credit her with hydrometers, others with the planisphere. What's agreed upon is this: she used tools better than anyone, and in doing so, made them sing. At home, she lights a small oil lamp and unrolls a parchment. Her hand moves swiftly. You peek over her shoulder. Calculations dance across the page like poetry. There's a beauty to them, not just function, but form. Not just answers, but elegance. She yawns, finally, a sign she's human, and stretches. The cat from before hops into her lap. Maybe the same one. Probably its smug descendant. Outside, the streets begin to still. Alexandria doesn't sleep much, but it does drowse. Somewhere, a priest chants under his breath. Somewhere else, someone snores in the back of a wine shop. But here, under a sky crowded with constellations, a young woman traces the path of Jupiter on a map she's drawn herself. She's calm, quiet, and completely at home, and as you lie back against the warm stones, the night wraps around you like her lecture notes, dense, mysterious, oddly soothing. Tomorrow she'll sail again, and teach, and wonder. But tonight, she dreams. You wake before the sun, not to the crow of a rooster or the clang of a market gate, but to the gentle shuffle of sandals on stone and the swish of linen robes. Hypatia is already moving. No alarm clock needed, no slave to stir her. Just the quiet urgency of someone with a lot on her mind and very little patience for sleep. She moves like someone who knows the city is hers. Not by power, not by inheritance, but by thought. Alexandria pulses and rattles with ambition, yet Hypatia walks its avenues with serene detachment, clutching her rolled scrolls like a warrior with her weapons. Today, you follow her not to her open-air lecture spot, but to a more public, more prestigious forum, the Grand Hall of the Museum, a vast colonnaded space near the library proper. This is where serious scholars gather, grizzled mathematicians with furrowed brows, astronomers who smell of oil and parchment. And Hypatia, now fully in her 20s, is not here to observe. She's here to teach them. Historians still argue whether her status at the museum was official or honorary. There are no surviving contracts, no plaques with her name etched in marble. But you only have to watch the way people part for her in the hallway to understand. Official or not, she is respected. Respected and, let's be honest, occasionally resented. A woman in a male philosopher's cloak. A teacher whose lectures leave older men blinking slowly in stunned silence. A mind so calm and so formidable that even political figures write to her for advice. You can practically hear the egos clenching across the courtyard. She sets up at the marble dais. Students, young and old, assemble quickly. Low murmurs rippling like waves on the canal. Hypatia unrolls a diagram, perfect circles intersecting cones, a delicate grid that might explain the very tilt of the heavens. And then her voice, low, unhurried, as if each word must be earned. She's teaching conic sections today, the shapes that result when you slice a cone at different angles. Circles, ellipses, parabolas, hyperbolas. You think back to yesterday's question. What is the shape of falling water? This is the answer. But she doesn't just hand it to them. She coaxes it out, like a cat from under a couch. Her chalk hand moves across the slate. Her words float like incense. And here's the quirky bit. Her lessons are often interrupted by silence. She stops mid-thought to let a concept hang. You expect fidgeting, whispers. There are none. Everyone waits, breath held, as if the silence itself is instructional. And perhaps it is. Hypatia's teaching style is more like meditation than lecture. There's a rhythm to it, a soft arc that matches the curves she sketches. She makes abstraction feel tactile. You don't just understand the ellipse, you feel it breathe. But outside this oasis of thought, things are shifting. The city is changing. Christianity, once a persecuted sect, is becoming the dominant force in Alexandria's politics. Temples are closing. Pagan statues are quietly removed or smashed in nighttime raids. The Serapeum, once the greatest temple in the city, has already been desecrated, its columns toppled like toy blocks. Hypatia watches, not with panic, but with a scholar's cool eye. She is neither zealot nor rebel, but she is a pagan, and she does not hide it. Historians still debate whether she practiced rituals or simply held on to classical philosophy as a cultural identity. Either way, her association with the old gods will soon cast shadows over her otherwise blinding intellect. But not today. Today, she walks home with ink on her fingertips and chalk dust on her robes, trailed by students like planets around a radiant sun. They ask questions about Plato, about motion, about the nature of truth. She answers with small, careful words that turn ordinary thoughts into luminous concepts. At home, she's building something. You lean in. It's a sphere, half copper, half glass, set atop a wooden base. A model of the heavens, maybe, or a version of the astrolabe. Tiny pins and etched arcs suggest measurements, calculations, and maybe a touch of imagination. It hums with quiet genius. It's rumored Hypatia built such devices not just to understand the heavens, but to predict them. Some whisper she could read the future in the stars. Others, jealous colleagues no doubt, accuse her of sorcery. But to you, it looks like serenity made visible. Like the blueprint of a mind that trusts the universe to be orderly, elegant, and worth measuring. You settle into a shadowed corner as she eats her simple meal. Cheese, figs, a little barley bread. She jots a few notes between bites. Always thinking, always charting. The evening call of the harbor bells rolls across the rooftops. Alexandria is winding down. Somewhere a dog barks, and a woman chants a prayer to an almost forgotten deity. The stars emerge slowly like shy scholars arriving late to lecture. And there she is again, on her rooftop, wrapped in a thin shawl, her telescope tilted skyward. She watches silently, doesn't speak, doesn't write, just watches. And in that stillness, you realize the truth. Hypatia doesn't seek to control the cosmos. She's simply in love with how it moves. Morning light creeps across her study, painting gold lines along the edges of scrolls, globes, and carefully stacked mathematical diagrams. You're already here, curled up in the corner as if you've lived in this house for years, watching Hypatia begin her day with a deep breath and a gentle stretch. More yoga than yawn. She's about to build something, and this time, it's not a metaphor. You follow her across the courtyard to a shaded workshop tucked behind a vine-covered wall. Inside, it smells like olive oil, brass filings, and lamp soot. The table is cluttered, chalk dust, thin sheets of hammered copper, gears the size of olives, and tiny bronze screws that would vanish with a single sneeze. Hypatia, now in her 30s, adjusts her robes and gets to work. No audience, no lecture, just her and the humming of ideas taking physical shape. Today, it's a sphere, again. But this one has inner rings. You lean closer. It's an armillary sphere, a model of the heavens, designed to show how celestial bodies move in elegant circles. Historians still debate whether Hypatia invented it herself, refined it, or used existing Greek models. But the craftsmanship is unmistakably hers. She doesn't rush. Every piece has a purpose. She oils a hinge, hums a scale from a long-forgotten hymn, and fits one ring inside another. You realize this isn't just about astronomy, it's about order. Where chaos reigns in the city beyond the walls, Hypatia insists the cosmos remains smooth and comprehensible. And then she teaches. This afternoon's lesson is private, a tutoring session with a student too shy to speak in front of others. He fidgets as she calmly lays out a diagram of planetary retrograde. "No, it's not that Mars moves backward," she says gently. "It's that we do." You blink. That's actually very useful in your own life. Hypatia's teaching is full of these elegant reversals, misconceptions untangled with a soft voice and the occasional sly smile. She doesn't ridicule, she reorients. You wonder if that's what draws so many to her. This sense that you're not just learning facts, but unlearning confusion. Still, not everyone is charmed. Outside the gates, tension simmers. The city is split. Philosophers versus clergy, pagans versus Christians, reason versus revelation. A bishop named Cyril is gaining power, and though Hypatia maintains respectful correspondence with some Christian leaders, others grumble more loudly now. She remains neutral, politely aloof. No sermons, no temple rites, just scrolls, charts, and logic. But neutrality can be read as resistance, and wisdom can look suspicious when it wears a woman's face. You notice a new quirk. She locks her door now. Her devices are kept inside a cedar chest with a bronze latch. Not because she's afraid of theft, because people are starting to fear what they don't understand. One man calls her the pagan sorceress, another the demon of geometry. She chuckles when she hears it. If only demons kept such neat graphs. Still, the whispers grow. And yet, her work continues. Letters from governors, questions from bishops, star charts from distant provinces. Her correspondence spans the Roman world, from Italy to Syria. She's a central node in the collapsing web of classical learning. In one scroll, a student in Constantinople writes, "I dreamt of the circles you showed me. They spun like lanterns. I awoke with clarity." She smiles, rolls the letter up, and tucks it among others tied with twine. There's something almost monastic about her habits. You start to think of her as Alexandria's quiet oracle. Never loud, never absent. She's always there, sitting in shadow, drawing lines between the stars. Historians still argue whether she published major works under her own name or edited her father's. Some suggest she wrote a treatise on Diophantine equations. Others believe she merely preserved and annotated. In either case, her fingerprints are everywhere, even where her name is not. And in her private moments, she gardens. Not with great ceremony, just a small patch on the roof where herbs and pale lilies grow in clay pots. She clips basil with geometric precision, hums softly, and presses her fingers into the dirt like she's solving a puzzle in soil. That's Hypatia for you. Intellect in earth, telescope, and trowel. One evening, you sit beside her as she oils the gears of her latest device, a hydrometer, maybe for measuring water density. "Most things worth knowing," she murmurs. "Resist haste." Her eyes are tired, but calm. There's always another problem to solve, always another line to draw. Outside, Alexandria continues its chaotic performance. Debates in the forums, processions in the streets, the occasional stone thrown through the wrong window. But inside this house, within these walls of paper, brass, and chalk, there is order. Hypatia's kind of order. Quiet, precise, unbothered. A different kind of power. You close your eyes as she winds the armillary sphere and the rings begin to turn, one inside the other, smooth and steady. The stars move as they always have. Hypatia smiles faintly. In a world that burns scrolls and breaks statues, she builds spheres. The afternoon sun filters through Alexandria's latticework windows, sketching patterns of light across the floor of Hypatia's study. You hear her before you see her, quiet footsteps, the rustle of parchment, the occasional low whistle she saves for the cat that has adopted her lap as permanent residence. But today's business isn't feline. It's correspondence. Stacks of letters lie in neat rows beside her inkpot. Some are fresh, sealed with wax stamped by governors and bishops. Others are cracked and softened by age. Parchments she refuses to throw away. She reads them like bedtime stories, only the characters are real and often terribly confused. Hypatia's mail comes from every corner of the fading Roman Empire. Local leaders, faraway scholars, military officials, even clergy. They ask about orbits, about logic, about the nature of the soul. You peek over her shoulder as she drafts replies, each letter in a hand so clean it looks like it could speak aloud. She writes with elegance, not flattery. Her tone never grovels, never condescends. And here's the curious thing. She's become something of a philosophical therapist. People write to her not just for solutions, but for sense. She doesn't fix their world. She helps them understand it. One scroll asks if omens from eclipses should concern the provincial army. She replies, "Concern yourself instead with the reliability of your bridges." A Roman prefect inquires about divine geometry. Her answer, "Divinity does not dwell in shapes, but in the clarity with which we understand them." Historians still debate how many letters are truly hers. Some appear in collections under other names, some attributed to her students. But the voice is distinct, calm, measured, and patient, even when the questions are absurd. You sit back and take in the room. The shelves hold more than scrolls. There are tiny instruments, calipers, miniature sundials, a delicate armillary sphere she's clearly rebuilt more than once. These aren't relics. They're her tools, her vocabulary. And when she isn't writing letters, she's receiving visitors. Today, a delegation from Cyrene arrives. 3 men in long cloaks, nervous around the cat, unsure if they should bow. One presents a star chart with a trembling hand. The other offers olive oil from his homeland. The third says nothing but watches Hypatia as if trying to memorize her. You'd think she were a statue come to life or a goddess pretending to be a teacher. She smiles politely, takes the chart, and without pause, corrects 2 of the constellations. "You've drawn Virgo twice," she says gently. "One's upside down." They look embarrassed. She pours them wine. Learning, she knows, should never taste bitter. As they leave, one turns back and asks, "What do you believe the stars are telling us?" Hypatia pauses. Her voice is almost a whisper. "That we are very small and very lucky to be curious." Later, she prepares for tomorrow's lecture, Platonism this time. The idea that behind the messy, chaotic world lies a realm of perfect forms, ideal circles, perfect justice, unspoiled triangles. The world is just shadows of those truths, moving on a cave wall. You listen as she outlines the argument aloud, not for practice, but because the ideas become clearer when spoken. "We see only fragments," she murmurs. "But fragments imply a whole." Then she does something unusual. She reaches for a new scroll, unmarked. You watch as she begins to draft a philosophical dialogue. Not a letter, not a theorem, A story, a fictional exchange between reason and doubt. In it, reason is gentle, curious, occasionally sarcastic. Doubt is defensive but vulnerable. They talk like old friends, circling each other, chasing the same truth. You wonder if this is how she sees herself. Not as a preacher of answers, but a careful dancer with questions. A quirky detail: Hypatia never signs her name with flair. No elaborate initials, no flourish of authority, just Hypatia, plain and unadorned. She seems to trust that clarity needs no embellishment. You step out into the courtyard where the sun's just beginning to lower. Light catches the rim of a bronze water clock. You hear a soft ticking, the kind that isn't meant to wake but to lull. The kind of ticking that might chart the flow of thoughts instead of time. The city beyond her villa hums with usual unrest. Religious debates spill into streets. People argue over theology with the same passion usually reserved for bread prices. Hypatia stays above the fray, not because she's indifferent, but because she sees it as noise. She lives by signal. But not all observers are content with that distance. Word is spreading. A woman philosopher, unbaptized, respected by governors, unafraid of bishops. Some call her a peacemaker, others a threat. And in letters she does not receive. Letters whispered in back rooms and lit by oil lamps, plans are forming. Hypatia knows, of course. She reads people as easily as stars, but she does not retreat. She continues to write, to teach, to build. Her life, like her letters, remains a patient unfolding. As dusk settles, you return to the study, where she scribbles one last note for the night. Her lamp glows low. The cat yawns, her final words before sleep. The soul, too, must have geometry. You let the sentence hang in the air, like a constellation, not yet named. The morning comes on slowly, as if even the sun has learned to tiptoe around Hypatia's world. You find her already moving through the city, not by chariot or sedan, but on foot, wrapped in dark robes that barely stir as she walks. A philosopher's cloak, not a politician's. But in Alexandria, the lines are beginning to blur. She makes her way toward the Caesareum, a magnificent temple originally built to honor the Roman emperors. But that time has passed. Now it has been converted into a Christian cathedral. Columns still rise with imperial arrogance, but crosses now hang where statues of Augustus once stood. Change is in the stones themselves. Hypatia walks past without flinching. She's not here for the temple. She's here for a meeting. Orestes, the Roman governor of Egypt, waits in the shaded portico of a nearby villa. A thin man dressed in official Roman garb, with the face of someone who hasn't slept since politics became religion. You can almost hear the tension coiled in his posture. Historians still argue about the nature of their relationship. Some call them allies, others whisper of affection, and a few predictably suspect scandal. But what matters here and now is trust. Orestes listens to Hypatia not as a curiosity, but as an advisor. Today he asks her about reconciliation between Christians and Neoplatonists, between factions loyal to the bishop Cyril and those clinging to the old civic model of Rome. Hypatia listens, eyes narrowed, not in judgment, but in calculation. Peace, she says softly, is not absence of opposition, it's presence of proportion. He nods slowly, writes nothing, just commits her words to memory like they were scripture. You trail her through the agora after the meeting. The city's market is alive with color, sound, and drama. Peddlers shout, spices sting your nose. A woman argues about olive prices while balancing a basket of eels. Nearby, a preacher rails against pagan texts, accusing them of corrupting the city's youth. Hypatia hears but does not stop. She buys ink, just ink, a quirky detail. She always selects the darkest batch possible, testing it with a quick stroke of her finger on papyrus. If it fades, she rejects it. Truth should not vanish in sunlight, she once said. But not everyone appreciates such metaphors. At a nearby fountain, you catch a whisper. Two men discussing the woman who guides the Roman and how her maps lead souls astray. The words are hushed, but their eyes burn. It's not just suspicion now, it's fury, masked as piety. Hypatia returns home and writes, not to Orestes, not to any bishop. She writes a dialogue, this one between harmony and fear. In it, harmony suggests reason can unite all beliefs. Fear responds with scripture and fire. She reads it aloud to herself, then tosses it in the brazier. The cat barely stirs. That evening, she walks to the edge of the city where the stars shine brightest. You follow. Her sandals barely whisper in the sand. She carries a scroll in one hand, a small astrolabe in the other. When she reaches the overlook, she sits cross-legged, unfolds the tool, and points it toward the horizon. Venus again. Always Venus. The planet of love, but also of tension, of slow backward dances across the sky. Retrograde. Illusion. You think of her earlier words. It's not that Mars moves backward, it's that we do. Historians still debate whether she charted planetary motions for practical navigation or for something deeper, for understanding cycles in human nature. Whatever the reason, her diagrams grow more intricate, her measurements more precise. You suspect she's no longer mapping the heavens, she's mapping Alexandria. She senses a shift coming, you feel it too, and yet she remains composed. Perhaps dangerously so. Word has reached her that Cyril, now Bishop of Alexandria, is tightening his grip. The Christian Parabolani, a group originally formed to care for the sick, have taken on a more militant tone. And Hypatia, silent and unyielding, stands out like an unlit lamp in a room of torches. Still, she teaches. Still, she walks through the city. Still, she wears black and refuses to apologize for clarity. A quirky scene unfolds the next morning. A child, barely 10, interrupts her lecture by throwing a grape at her. The students gasp. Hypatia bends down, picks up the fruit, examines its geometry, and says, "An ellipse. Excellent aim." She smiles. The class exhales. But her humor can't soften everything. Outside, rumors begin to circulate that she bewitches governors, that she commands the moon, that her devices summon demons, that she's to blame for every failure of negotiation, every misstep in the city's fragile peace. She hears these whispers, never flinches. But at night, when she thinks no one is watching, not even the cat, you notice her hand tremble slightly as she pours her ink. It's a small tremor, but it means everything. Because even Hypatia, Alexandria's sleepiest philosopher, knows the city is stirring toward a reckoning. And all the scrolls in the library might not be enough to draw a circle wide enough to contain it. You rise with the dawn again, but something in the air has shifted. The breeze carries less salt and more soot. The morning pigeons are quieter, and even the harbor creaks under its own silence. Alexandria is still, but not in peace. It's the stillness of held breath before a storm. Hypatia walks as always, deliberate, calm, the only person in the city who doesn't seem to match the tempo. But today, as she crosses the agora, you notice it. People part for her, but not out of respect. There's a flicker of something sharper. Suspicion, maybe. or fear dressed as piety. Still, she continues, her scrolls tucked under one arm, her robe brushing against the market's edge. A potter bows awkwardly. A fishmonger pretends not to see her. One man crosses himself, murmuring a prayer under his breath. You trail her to the lecture space, not the open garden today, too exposed, but a more sheltered colonnade in the courtyard of a friend's house. Her students wait, eyes flicking toward the entrance, every time footsteps approach. She doesn't acknowledge the tension. She just begins. Today's lesson is on harmony, not in music, but in mathematics. The ratios that govern chords also govern the movement of stars. You sit with the others, listening as she draws lines in the dust with her stick. A perfect fifth, she says softly, is as natural as a spiral shell. She speaks not of gods, not of politics, but of balance. The sort of balance no mob can grasp. Historians still debate how many of these final lectures she gave. Some say she continued teaching until the very end. Others believe she stepped back quietly as tensions rose. But here in your drowsy eavesdropping corner, she still holds class, and she still refuses to show fear. After the lesson, one student lingers, young, anxious. He asks, too fast, whether she believes the rumors about Bishop Cyril wanting her silenced. She looks at him for a long moment. Then, with the gentlest sarcasm, if ignorance could silence thought, the scroll would never have been invented. The boy flushes, but he smiles. She sends him away with a page of diagrams and a fig. Back at home, she tends to her garden. The lilies have bloomed, pink and quiet. She waters them from a chipped clay jug and hums a song no one remembers the name of. You notice new scratches on her work table, rushed calculations, planetary angles, maybe attempts at predicting more than weather. She's measuring something, some slow decline, not of stars, of civility. And here's something odd. She's begun copying texts by hand again. Not her usual annotations, but full scrolls, preserving them. You glance at one, Plotinus, dense and beautiful. Another is a table of lunar eclipses. A quirky thing. She writes in the margins to herself, small reminders, jokes. Refine this when less doom looms. Or, ask Orestes if eclipses make Christians nervous. You want to laugh, but you can't, not today. Because that afternoon, as the sun slides westward and the city's shadows grow long, Orestes visits. Not in secret, but plainly. No guards, no formalities. Just two minds meeting at the edge of unraveling civility. He paces while she remains seated. You don't hear the whole conversation, just snippets. Cyril won't back down. I wouldn't ask him to. They blame you. A long silence. Then Hypatia says, Do you know what a spiral is, Orestes? It is a circle, a tempting escape. You don't know if he understands. Maybe no one does but her. He leaves with a bowed head. She does not watch him go. Historians still argue whether this was the turning point, whether Orestes failed to protect her, or whether there was simply nothing left to protect her with. Either way, her name had become too visible, too symbolic, too useful a scapegoat. The Parabolani had already been muttering. Now they act. Later she walks alone. No escort. No cloak of fear. Just Hypatia in the afternoon sun, taking her usual route to the library's western wing, where her instruments are stored. You walk with her, though no one sees you. You watch as she moves past citizens who do see her, but say nothing. And in that silence, a strange sound, not metal, not marching, just a faint rustle, like reeds parting in a breeze. You feel it before you see it, the circle tightening. She turns a corner and stops. A crowd, not large, not armed in any obvious way, Just men with eyes full of purpose and mouths tight with certainty. There are no scrolls in their hands, no logic, no desire to understand. They call her names. Some you don't understand. Others you recognize from the slander whispered in the forums. She says nothing. You want her to run, but she stands. You want her to explain, but she's done that her whole life. And then, just before the first hand is raised, she speaks. Softly, barely audible. You fear what I will not surrender. And then the sun flares behind her, and everything goes quiet. The city holds its breath. You find yourself not in the street, not among the murmuring crowd, but somewhere quieter. Inside the echoing corridors of Hypatia's home, where the scrolls still lie open and her garden still drips from a morning watering. The cat, bewildered, paces near the door, pausing as if expecting her to return with figs or chalk. But she doesn't. Alexandria is no longer in motion. It is in recoil. Word spreads quickly, as rumors often do when truth becomes inconvenient. She was a witch, someone says. She led Orestes against the church, claims another. The sky will be cleaner now, says a third. These are not facts. These are camouflage for cowardice. Historians still argue about the specifics. Was it the Parabolani? A mob stirred by priests? A moment of fury, or a carefully planned elimination? The details blur, but the tragedy holds steady. Hypatia is gone. Her house is not ransacked. Her scrolls are not burned. No edict bans her name. But something colder happens. They stop speaking of her. Her name is dropped like a hot coal. She vanishes not in fire, but in silence. You walk the alleys she once walked, the lecture spaces she once filled. They are quieter now. The gardens are still green, the sky still blue, but it feels as if the stars themselves have gone dim. And yet her legacy doesn't vanish, not truly. In the weeks that follow, students gather quietly in homes and courtyards, whispering her lessons to one another, redrawing her diagrams from memory. They share not just her ideas, but her calm, her patience, her smile at paradox. Some of her tools are hidden, tucked in clay jars and sealed in basements. Her armillary sphere disappears entirely. Her papers are copied and disguised as anonymous treatises. The ideas survive, even if the name is spoken with hesitation. You step into one of those secret gatherings, sitting among young scholars who pass a tattered scroll hand to hand. They aren't just preserving her work, they're mourning, quietly, without outrage. Just long pauses and uncertain hands tracing lines in the dust. A quirky thing, one student begins carving a stylized circle into a wall, a spiral within a circle. No words, just the shape she loved. He doesn't explain it. He doesn't need to. Further away in Cyrene, a letter arrives to find its recipient dead. It's a question about Venus. How best to chart its movements during retrograde? The answer will never come. But in that moment, even a stranger learns her name. Historians still wonder, did she believe in an afterlife? In the gods? In anything beyond math and moonlight? She never wrote it down. Perhaps her faith was simply this, that knowledge, passed from hand to hand, could survive even cruelty. Orestes disappears from history not long after. Cyril, bishop of Alexandria, rises higher. Statues are built, edicts issued. And yet, centuries later, it is not his equations students copy. It is not his voice that echoes through lecture halls. It's hers. The Renaissance will rediscover her name. Enlightenment thinkers will call her a martyr for reason. Poets will write verses to her. Women scholars will wear her memory like armor. But here, Now, as Alexandria sleeps under the weight of its own silence, you sit in her study one last time. The lamp has gone out. The water clock ticks faintly. And outside in the clear night sky, the stars turn on their perfect paths. She measured them once. Now they keep time in her absence. And in the stillness you hear her voice. Not loud, not spectral, just steady, like chalk on slate. Truth has no master. Time drifts forward, and you with it. Alexandria no longer wears Hypatia's presence like a cloak, but traces of her still cling to the stone, like warmth left in a chair just vacated. Her name is seldom spoken, and yet somehow she remains a reference point. A negative space scholars step around as though unsure whether her ghost will object. The library survives, sort of. Its great collections have been scattered, shelves emptied, wings sealed or quietly burned in the decades that follow. No one event destroys it. It's more of a long, polite erasure. A slow-motion forgetfulness. But you find her there, in fragments. A page here, a marginal note, a geometric figure, sketched in a corner with handwriting too careful to be anyone else's. The soul must have symmetry, it reads again. You notice something else. One of her former students has begun teaching. His name is faded, unimportant, but his manner is unmistakable. He pauses for long silences. He teaches not by giving answers, but by asking questions. He stills the room with one gentle correction, and you can't help but smile. In these little repetitions, she lives. Further north, in Constantinople, a few surviving scrolls make their way into the hands of philosophers, some of whom scoff at them, others who marvel. A mathematician marvels at her refinements to Apollonius. An astronomer copies her celestial tables, slightly confused but fascinated. Even centuries later, as Arabic scholars rise in Baghdad's House of Wisdom, whispers of her work appear in translated texts. Her name rarely survives the transition, but the shape of her mind, her phrasing, her diagrams, her method, endures like a watermark pressed into the parchment of history. Historians still debate whether she authored the now lost Commentary on Diophantus, or whether she preserved the astronomical canon from vanishing. But her touch is felt, unmistakably, like the slight scent left behind in a scholar's favorite chair. You travel forward again. It's the 18th century now, and European thinkers have rediscovered Neoplatonism. A French salon debates the moral philosophy of ancient Greece. Someone mentions Hypatia. A man scoffs. A woman could never teach Plato. But a woman at the end of the table gently corrects him. She didn't teach Plato. She interpreted him. That's harder. And so it goes. A quirky detail. One English historian in the 19th century refers to her as Alexandria's last light before the long night. He means it poetically, but he's not far off. You wonder quietly if Hypatia would even want a legacy. She didn't write manifestos. She didn't storm forums or demand followers. She just thought, deeply, continuously, and with elegance. Would she cringe at being turned into a symbol? Or smile gently, as she always did, when someone got the math slightly wrong? In the modern era, her name becomes a rallying cry, not just for scholars, but for dreamers, feminists, atheists, philosophers, astronomers, skeptics, teachers who believe questions are holy. Her image appears in stained glass in a London museum, wearing robes that are probably inaccurate, but the eyes are still right. In one corner of the digital universe, a young girl writes a school essay titled Hypatia, The Woman Who Measured the Sky. You watch as she carefully copies a diagram of conic sections, pausing to color the ellipse in blue. Another child, this time in Cairo, downloads a podcast about her. He hears the words Greek, Roman, Egyptian, and philosopher, all wrapped into one. He smiles. She's like us, he says to his brother, a mix. Historians still can't agree on her full legacy. Was she the last pagan philosopher? A proto-scientist? A footnote in the fall of Rome? A martyr for reason? They argue endlessly. But you know better. You know her as the woman who held up a spiral shell and saw the universe, who coaxed answers out of silence, who believed that precision was a kind of love, who fed figs to students and built instruments that hummed with starlight. You sit once more in her old study. The room has changed, rebuilt into a modern replica by hopeful architects. The air smells of linen and dust again. One wall holds copies of her diagrams. The garden outside has been replanted, lilies, basil, and one stubborn fig tree. A tour guide speaks of her in hushed reverence, but you tune him out. You close your eyes and remember her voice, low, patient, slightly amused. And for a moment you swear you hear her say, "The stars do not need our approval to shine." You blink, and centuries collapse like scrolls curling in on themselves. Now you're back, not in Alexandria, not in any one moment, but in a slow drift through time, floating on the ripples Hypatia left behind. Her name continues to surface, not in grand gestures, but in footnotes, margins, whispered mentions during late-night university seminars. Professors nod knowingly, students scribble the name, and somewhere someone decides to build a life around those 4 syllables. Hypatia. You settle into a quiet 20th century lecture hall, sunlight slanting through dusty windows. A woman stands at the front, chalk in hand. She's not Hypatia, but the way she explains gravitational curves and orbital mechanics, it's eerily familiar. She even says, "Let's not fear complexity, it's just clarity in disguise." And you know Hypatia would have smiled at that. Meanwhile, others turn her into metaphor. A silent film from 1920s Italy casts her as a tragic heroine. Later, novels imagine her as a mystic, a martyr, a scientist centuries ahead of her time. Historians cringe at the embellishments, but the public keeps imagining. They need her, not as she was, but as a symbol of what could have been. And yet, through all these revisions, something stays true. The way she sat with questions, the way she resisted the urge to rush, her refusal to flatten the universe into a single doctrine. Historians still argue about her philosophies. Was she a hard rationalist? A soft mystic? Did she lean toward the stars or the soul? There's no definitive answer, and that might be the point. You walk now through modern Alexandria. The city is loud again. Cars honk, vendors yell, and satellite dishes bloom like metal flowers on every rooftop. Yet on a quiet street near the harbor, there's a statue. It's her. Granite, not bronze. Weathered, but unmistakable. She holds a scroll in one hand, the other outstretched. Not in warning, not in prayer, but in invitation. You stand before it, and it almost feels like she's mid-lecture again, about to explain why circles are merely echoes of infinity. A local child tugs her mother's sleeve. "Who is she?" "She was a thinker," the mother replies. "A teacher, from long ago." "And she lived here?" "Yes, right here." The child looks up at the statue again and smiles. Not all legacies are built in marble or martyrdom. Some live in the quiet certainty passed from mind to mind, from hand to hand. A concept scribbled in a notebook, a habit of asking why before how, a love of reason without fear. Back home, in whatever century you call your own, you begin to notice her fingerprints more often, in the habit of a teacher pausing before answering, in the structure of a solar system app modeled after ancient armillary spheres, in the patience of a mentor who listens before correcting. You find Hypatia in the details. A quirky thing, her name has been assigned to a crater on the moon. Hypatia Crater, they call it. A cold, silent memorial, yet somehow perfect. Even in death, she orbits us. Elsewhere, a rare mineral discovered in Egypt is named Hypatia Stone. It's older than Earth, formed in space. Scientists marvel at it. And again, they whisper her name. You wonder what she'd think of this. Her name on rocks and craters, attached to mysteries she never imagined. Maybe she'd chuckle. Maybe she'd shrug. Maybe she'd ask whether those naming things have truly studied them. One evening, you find yourself reading a student's essay online titled The Last Librarian. Why Hypatia Still Matters. It's flawed, a bit romanticized, but full of heart. The student concludes, Hypatia reminds us that intelligence isn't arrogance. It's wonder. It's care. It's choosing to build something beautiful in a world that may never understand it. And you nod, because that's the truth of her. Not just a woman with scrolls and spheres, but a quiet force against ignorance. A lamp kept lit even when the night howled. And when you close the essay, the glow of your screen fades, and in its place you feel a flicker. Not from your device, but from within, like a star chart unfolding in your chest. The lines are there. All you have to do is follow them. The city breathes differently at night. Back in Alexandria, though it could be any city, any age, you walk through empty streets that remember too much. You pass a small courtyard where figs once dried in the sun, and pause beside a cracked fountain. Somewhere beneath your feet, fragments of Hypatia's life rest quietly. Chalk dust, broken tools, unreadable parchment melted into sand. She never asked to be remembered. She asked only that her students think well, reason well, wonder well. You feel her more than ever now. You slip into a modern library, not as grand as the one she loved, but still holy in its own quiet way. Rows of books, pools of lamplight, digital displays with planetary simulations. You sit down at a computer and type her name, Hypatia of Alexandria. Instantly, the page populates. There's her face, or rather, a dozen imagined faces. Artists through the ages have conjured portraits, regal, serene, commanding, soft. Each one reveals more about the artist than about her. You scroll past paintings and busts. A Roman coin someone thinks bears her profile. A feminist blog. A science podcast. A skeptical YouTuber calling her the patron saint of logic. And then something odd. A recently uncovered manuscript discussed in a niche academic forum. Scholars are abuzz. It appears to be a student's lecture notes, dated around the 5th century. A short passage, preserved by accident on the reverse side of a tax record. It reads, She said the stars do not argue, so neither should we. That truth has a curve, not a corner. That to observe is to honor. No name is signed, but the tone is unmistakable. A quirky thing, the scroll had been used to wrap a basket of onions during an excavation. Even buried under centuries of market dirt, her words found a way to outlast assumptions. You close your eyes. Somewhere, a music student in Sao Paulo is naming her new composition The Geometry of Hypatia. In Kyoto, a garden designer builds spiral walkways, inspired by ancient Greek stargazers. In Nairobi, a teenager builds an astronomy app and places a single quote on its homepage. Clarity moves in circles. These aren't tributes. They're echoes. Historians still argue about whether Hypatia's death marked the true end of classical antiquity, or merely one of its final flickers. But there's no debate about her symbolic power. She became what few humans do, a myth woven from a real life. Not a saint, not a savior, but a mirror, reflecting whatever age stares into her story. In one century, she's a martyr for science. In another, a warning against dogma. In another still, an icon of defiance wrapped in equations. But when you brush past all the symbols, peel back the politics, and set aside the centuries of projected meaning, you remember the woman herself. She of the steady voice, the neat diagrams, the jokes soft enough to disarm a crowd and sharp enough to cut through ego. She who believed you could use math to feel the world more clearly. Outside, a soft wind stirs. You find yourself back at the edge of the sea, where stars once watched her trace arcs in the sand with a twig. You crouch low, draw a circle, then a spiral. Then, just for fun, an ellipse. Not perfect, but close enough to make her smile. You imagine her beside you, not as a ghost, but as a mentor, patient, and just a little amused. "You'll get it," she says, "eventually." Then she walks on, sandals crunching softly, robes trailing behind, into the dark toward some deeper question. You don't follow, you just watch, because now, finally, you understand. She wasn't trying to be remembered. She was trying to remind us how to think. Even now, as time flows forward like a river cutting through centuries of stone, Hypatia's presence lingers, not in volume, but in rhythm. Not in monuments, but in moments. In the quiet click of a telescope adjusting to the night sky. In the gentle hush of chalk on a classroom board. In the long pause before a teacher answers a question not with facts, but with another question. You're walking through a museum this time, modern, angular, filled with light. A wing dedicated to ancient learning features her name carved modestly into the marble lintel. Hypatia of Alexandria. Philosopher, mathematician, teacher. Beneath it stands a replica of her study. You recognize the careful layout. Scroll racks, a spherical astrolabe recreated from descriptions. A low marble table etched with geometric shapes. There's even a reed pen resting on a dish of ink darker than midnight. A small plaque reads, "Items recreated based on 4th-5th century Greek sources and Islamic-era commentaries. Accuracy debated." Historians still argue about what tools she really used, what concepts she pioneered, what notes she added to her father's work. Was she merely a gifted editor? A brilliant synthesizer? Or something more? A philosophical architect in her own right? You linger at a quote attributed to her, scratched into bronze. "Reserve your right to think, for even to think wrongly is better than not to think at all." The quote's origin is shaky, but the message? Classic Hypatia. A perfect blend of clarity and quiet defiance. Across the room, a group of school children pause at a digital display. A short animation plays. Hypatia teaching in the agora, gently correcting a student's math, then looking skyward. The children giggle. One says, "She's like Space Hermione." You suppress a grin. A quirky thing. A NASA rover control engineer once said she names her test scripts after women in science. One is Hypatia, the primary pathfinding logic. A tiny tribute hidden in code, helping machines navigate Mars. Later, in the museum's bookstore, you find a thin volume, Hypatia's Conics, a modern translation. You flip through it. Diagrams dance across the pages. Elegant parabolas, circles nestled inside ellipses. Theorems wrapped in footnotes. One page contains a faint diagram of intersecting spirals and a modern scholar's marginalia. speculative, possibly hers. Possibly hers. The phrase follows you like a melody, because everything about Hypatia lives in that space of possibility. No firm borders, no final answers, only lines gently curving toward understanding. You step out into the afternoon sun. Somewhere across the world, students are sitting down in philosophy classrooms, writing Neoplatonism across the top of their notes. Professors reference Plotinus, then pause and add, and of course, Hypatia's contributions. The students nod. Some recognize the name, others underline it. All carry it forward. Not far from here, an artist sketches a modern portrait of Hypatia. She wears contemporary clothes, carries a laptop bag, and stands in front of a blackboard littered with equations. In this version, she is ageless, smirking slightly, as if she knows you'll never pin her down. Back in Alexandria, a local guide leads a tour through the old city, past the ancient theater and the presumed site of the museum. He mentions Hypatia briefly, too briefly. The tourists nod, snap photos, move on. But one woman lingers. She steps away, crouches beside a worn column base, and runs her fingers over the limestone. Perhaps searching, perhaps saying thank you. And you wonder, is that all remembrance needs? Not marble statues or grand epics, just a single person, pausing long enough to trace the spiral of a mind once unafraid of darkness. You walk on. The stars above seem somehow closer. You imagine Hypatia up there, charting their arcs on some cosmic scroll. Not as a saint, not as a ghost, just a teacher, still drawing curves in the dark. Tonight you return to the streets of Alexandria, only they're not ancient anymore. Motorcycles dart through alleyways. The call to prayer drifts over satellite dishes. Neon signs flicker near half-buried ruins. Yet somewhere beneath it all, the tiled walkways, the diesel fumes, the concrete stairwells, Alexandria still remembers her. You pass a small school tucked behind an aging bakery. The paint peels, the chalkboards squeak, and the students chatter restlessly. But then a teacher enters. She wears no robe, carries no scroll, but her voice is measured. Her diagrams are sharp. She speaks of celestial mechanics. And her name? Hypatia School for Girls. A humble plaque out front dedicates the building to a thinker who defied silence with thought. It's nothing grand, but it's solid, enduring, like her. Inside the classroom, the teacher draws ellipses. A quiet moment. One student raises her hand, not to ask for the answer, but to question the very framing of the problem. The teacher smiles. That's the point, she says. Thinking isn't about getting it right. It's about looking harder. You could almost swear you hear Hypatia humming approval. A quirky modern tradition has emerged online. A week each March where educators, science fans, and quiet nerds across the world post about her. Some share quotes, real or misattributed. Some record videos breaking down her astronomy. Others just tweet photos of books and write, "For Hypatia." Historians still argue over whether this collective nostalgia does more harm than good, whether we oversimplify her, turn her into a secular saint instead of grappling with her complexity. But nostalgia, like gravity, pulls us somewhere meaningful. And unlike gravity, nostalgia lets us choose where we land. You find yourself wandering through a digital archive next. Scans of crumbling papyrus, annotated PDFs, a half-translated commentary on Ptolemy. In one folder, a scholar's attempt to reconstruct Hypatia's version of Apollonius's third book on conics. In another, a podcast episode titled "The Woman Who Charted the Sky, Then Vanished into It." You listen. The voice is calm, reverent. The host admits that most of what we know about Hypatia is shaped by absence. But isn't that what makes a constellation, she asks? Not just the stars, but the space between them. You close your eyes and picture her again, not the statue, not the symbol, just the woman, writing with quiet confidence, sketching in the margins, sharpening a reed pen while a cat settles into the crook of her arm. In your imagined moment, you ask her if she minds being a symbol. She raises an eyebrow. A symbol of what exactly? You hesitate. Curiosity, rationality, dignity in a world without much of it? She shrugs. If I must be a symbol, let it be for sitting still long enough to think clearly. Then she smiles. But I'd rather be remembered for the ellipses. Because the ellipse, she once explained, is not a broken circle. It is a complete shape of its own, made not by failing to be perfect, but by being pulled by two centers at once. Tension made beautiful. You open your eyes. The podcast ends. The world continues spinning. Across oceans, a girl lies on her roof at night, trying to draw the moon's path. Her app glitches, so she draws it by hand. Her father watches, curious. "What are you doing?" he asks. She shrugs, seeing if I can feel what she felt.
Who?
Hypatia. And maybe, just maybe, she does. Now you find yourself in a place that isn't on any map. It's not Alexandria, not Rome, not even the quiet digital archives where Hypatia flickers into existence now and then. It's a room of minds, a shared space between memory and imagination, between what was and what never quite got to be. In this space, Hypatia is neither martyr nor myth. She is a teacher preparing the day's lesson. You watch as she arranges stones on a low table, mapping orbits. Her hand pauses midair. Then, with a flick of her finger, she adjusts one stone slightly. A student blinks, but that breaks the symmetry. Hypatia raises an eyebrow. Does it, or does it reveal a deeper one? The student stares, nods slowly, and begins rearranging. This moment never happened. And yet, it did. Somewhere, something like it must have happened. Often. Because when you read the calm clarity of her surviving work, you feel it. The discipline of patience, the invitation to puzzle, the refusal to simplify what deserves reverence. Historians still debate what exactly Hypatia believed about the divine. Some say she was a Neoplatonist through and through, that she saw the one as a distant, perfect abstraction. Others insist she was more pragmatic, focusing on observable truths. Still others believe she was a spiritual skeptic, preferring the known to the unknowable. You suspect the answer lives not in books, but in how she lived. Her reverence for order, her passion for celestial harmony, her refusal to bow to dogma, all hint at a faith not in gods or rituals, but in clarity. She didn't need miracles. She had mathematics. A quirky bit of lore suggests she kept her astrolabe in a silk-lined case, not for superstition, but simply because precision instruments deserve gentleness. It might not be true, but it feels true. You watch as she demonstrates the movement of Mercury to a small group. Her voice is low, rhythmic, like a lullaby disguised as a theorem. Her hand traces arcs in the air. The students follow, and their breathing slows, caught in the cadence of logic. She pauses to ask a question, something deceptively simple. What does it mean to measure something invisible? No one answers right away, because they know she doesn't want the answer. She wants the thinking. Outside this imagined school, the city teeters again on the edge of tension. Religion battles politics. Mobs test the boundaries of power. But here, in this moment, you've conjured and preserved, time slows. Complexity is allowed to breathe. You wonder again, what would have happened if she had lived? Would she have fled? Founded her own academy in another city? Would she have written more? Taught longer? Charted the stars even further? Maybe, maybe not. But one thing is certain. The tools of her mind, the way she questioned, connected, and carried knowledge, did not die with her. They seeded something, quietly, steadily. You see it now in every gentle act of intellectual courage, in the librarian who refuses to discard an obscure manuscript, in the engineer who spends years refining a single formula, in the teacher who tells her students, there is no shame in not knowing, only in not asking. You realize Hypatia's real legacy wasn't astronomy, or conics, or even Neoplatonism. It was grace under clarity. She taught that ideas aren't just fragile things to be guarded. They're living entities to be nurtured, even loved. You rise from the imagined table. The chalk fades. The students disappear. But the feeling stays, like the afterimage of a star long gone, still glowing, still tracing its spiral. The night deepens now, velvet and slow. You drift again, not through space, not through time, but through the quiet corridors of consequence. Because Hypatia's life, brief as it was, continues to ripple outward in surprising places. Not just where you'd expect, books, schools, stargazing software, but in less obvious corners. Corners where quiet thought still matters. Somewhere in a village high in the Andes, a grandmother folds a scrap of cloth embroidered with star charts. She learned them from her grandmother, who learned from hers. No one remembers the origins of the patterns anymore, but one spiral is stitched so precisely that it mimics Hypatia's own diagrams. Coincidence? Maybe, but it makes you pause. Elsewhere, in a dim-lit lab in Sweden, a researcher solving an orbital anomaly notices an error in a widely used planetary table. She adjusts it using a centuries-old ratio from Ptolemaic calculations. Her colleague raises an eyebrow. "How did you know that would work?" She shrugs. "I read it once. I think it might have been from Hypatia." The footnote is hard to verify, but the calculation, it holds. A quirky fact. One lunar mapping project buried in the documentation of a now-defunct space agency refers to Hypatia Sector, a cluster of low-crater terrain believed to mimic ellipsoidal wave dispersion. No one in the public ever noticed. But it's there, buried, quiet, waiting. You find yourself now in a university archive in Prague. A pale grad student blows dust off a bound volume. Inside, Latin translations of ancient Greek astronomy. Nothing unusual until you see a margin note. A small phrase written in Greek. She said the world makes more sense when you stop asking it to. No author, no title, just that sentence, and somehow you know it was her. Historians still argue over the limits of Hypatia's scientific contributions. Was she merely preserving the work of others or pushing boundaries herself? Most agree she edited, clarified, improved. Some suggest she hinted at methods that wouldn't resurface until Kepler. The evidence is thin, but the possibility? Deliciously open. Because sometimes the most powerful minds don't thunder. They whisper. They plant seeds and let centuries do the watering. In a small Parisian bookstore, a philosophy student argues gently with a friend about her. She wasn't revolutionary, the friend insists. She just kept a tradition alive. The student smiles. Exactly. And in a time like that, that was revolutionary. The two toast her memory with espresso and underlines. You return once more to the sea. Not the ancient Alexandrian harbor, but a modern one. Quiet, silvered with moonlight. A lone amateur astronomer adjusts a telescope on a rooftop nearby. She's tracking Venus tonight, trying to understand retrograde movement. Her notebook is filled with arcs, guesses, swirls. In the corner she scribbled, Hypatia would have known this already, and she probably would have. There's comfort in knowing someone once looked up with the same questions you're asking now. That someone once puzzled over shadows on the moon, the wobble of Mars, the math of how things fall and fly and turn. Hypatia didn't invent the stars. She didn't conquer ignorance with a blazing sword. She just stood at the edge of certainty, barefoot and curious, and said, "Let's go a little further." And still we do. Somewhere in your dreams, you return to the agora. It is early morning, cool, a soft haze rising from the marble streets. The market has not yet woken, and the philosophers gather like drowsy birds, unfurling their thoughts alongside their cloaks. You move quietly through the colonnade, past olive sellers setting up their baskets, past children playing games with pebbles and whispered equations. And there, seated on a low stone bench with a scroll balanced on her knee, is Hypatia. She is not young, not old, not immortal. She is simply thinking. She watches two ants crawl across a diagram she's drawn in charcoal on the flagstones. She does not shoo them. Instead, she watches them trace her spiral, as if testing its logic with tiny feet. You sit beside her, though she doesn't acknowledge you at first. You watch the ants, too. They're very thorough. Finally, without turning, she asks, "What shape would you trust to hold the weight of the sky?" You hesitate. She smiles faintly. "Good, you're not answering too quickly." Historians still argue whether Hypatia truly saw herself as a philosopher in the classical sense, or as something more integrated, a blend of mathematician, astronomer, and moral guide. In her world, such categories were not so neatly divided. Knowledge was a mosaic, each piece touching another, each idea a reflection. In this imagined morning, you watch as her students begin to arrive. Young, old, men, women, Egyptian, Greek, Roman. The world was complicated then, but here, learning was the shared language. Scrolls are unrolled, questions are posed. No one shouts, no one dominates. They speak in the soft rhythm of respect. A quirky thing, someone brings her a small clay tablet with etched diagrams. It's slightly crooked. The ellipses don't close cleanly. She holds it up, squints, and says, "It's wrong, but in the most interesting way." The student beams. Later, she explains a planetary model using a lyre string. She plucks it gently and shows how tension changes tone, just as gravity bends movement. It's part science, part poetry. You wonder if the string hums at the same frequency as her mind. Then, the sound of bells. Not temple bells, not war bells. The bells of time, pushing this vision away. Because, of course, it isn't real. Not in the strictest sense. It's a dream, a synthesis. Your mind stitching together fragments, facts, and feelings to imagine what her classroom might have been. But that's how she survives, in interpretation. Not preserved in amber, but in you, in your curiosity, in your stillness, in the way you now pause just a second longer when someone says, "That's too complicated." You hear her voice again. Complicated things are just waiting to become beautiful. Outside this vision, a college student somewhere rereads a paragraph about her and decides to take astronomy instead of accounting. A retiree in Toronto teaches his granddaughter how to use a sextant, mumbling something about an old Greek who understood this stuff long before GPS. A writer sketches a character based on her, adding a mischievous smirk and too many chalk stains. Historians still argue about the last days of Hypatia's life, but they never seem to argue about her mind. It was wide, soft-spoken, profound. A mind built for elliptical truths and circular reasoning that somehow arrived at clarity. You glance down. The ants have finished their journey. One spiral, then another. Hypatia rises, dusts off her robes, and for the first time she looks directly at you. Are you ready to keep thinking? She asks. Not gently, not sternly, but sincerely. You nod, and then she walks away, back into the soft light of morning. And you remain, filled not with sadness, but with something quieter, something rounder, something that turns like the stars. You walk the curve of the spiral now, the same spiral she traced in sand, that students copied on wax tablets, that philosophers debated over cups of watered wine and long pauses, a shape with no beginning and no end, only motion. That's how she taught, not in straight lines, but in spirals of return. Each answer opening a better question. You return to memories that are not yours but feel familiar, like the smell of old parchment, or the sound of oil lamps flickering against a plaster wall, or the soft rhythmic scrape of a stylus dragging a question into wet clay. Hypatia never wrote an autobiography. We have no journals, no letters, but we have the residue of her mind. An equation simplified one step beyond elegance. A celestial diagram that orbits both science and faith. A generation of students who carried her cadence into a world that didn't deserve it. Historians still puzzle over the silence in the record. How could someone so beloved, so central, simply vanish from the scrolls? Did the scribes skip her on purpose? Were her works burned, stolen, absorbed into male names? Or did she simply not care? Maybe for Hypatia, being remembered wasn't the point. Being right wasn't the point either. What mattered was the process, the slow churn of clarity, the elegance of a thought crafted with care, like a mosaic piece chosen not for its shine, but for its fit. You wander now through a garden. It's quiet here. Fig trees casting lacy shadows, basil sprouting between stone paths. This is no ancient Greek grove. It's a modern tribute funded by a quiet university, tended by students who probably don't know who it's named for. But one sits on a bench, tablet in hand, drawing spiral arms of a galaxy. She pauses, zooms in, draws them again, slower this time. She's doing it right. A quirky modern rumor claims that an asteroid recently named Hypatia 496 has a wobble in its orbit. Not a flaw, but a unique curve, just off enough to inspire an entirely new model of gravitational interaction. The astronomer who discovered it said, "It's weirdly beautiful, like a misfit that makes more sense than expected." That's her. You hear a music student somewhere composing a piece titled Ellipses for a Forgotten Mind. It doesn't resolve. It circles. It spins back toward itself. No melody triumphs, just a long, slow breath of thought. Back in your mind, you revisit her final days. Not the tragic end, but the last quiet days before the storm. She rises early, teaches in whispers, feeds the garden cats, copies one more section of a commentary she knows may never survive. She leans over a bowl of ink, watching the stars reflect on its surface. They wobble, just slightly. She smiles. They're not still. Nothing ever is. That sentence survives, not in ink, but in the behavior of those who think like her. Gently, iteratively, curiously. And perhaps that is legacy enough. You settle into her rhythm again. The quiet pull of study, the silent joy of making meaning where others see chaos, the humility to admit that even the firmest truth may only be the best idea for now. And now, centuries later, you too begin to feel her not as a monument, but as a movement, not carved in stone, but woven into motion. Not the final word, but the question you whisper to yourself when you look at the stars. What shape do I trust to hold the sky? The spiral draws tighter now. You've traveled far, across deserts and archives, through museums and marketplaces, through timelines both real and reconstructed, and still you're circling her. Not closing in, not reaching a conclusion, but understanding that some lives are meant to remain open-ended. You find yourself in a modern lecture hall, dimly lit, the kind where students half listen while the rain taps at the windows. A young professor at the front speaks not of Hypatia directly, but of the long arc of classical thought. This diagram, she says, tapping the projector screen, appears again and again across ancient texts. Sometimes it's mathematical, sometimes astronomical. But one of the earliest and most elegant versions came from Alexandria, and probably, though we'll never confirm it, from Hypatia. A student raises his hand. Why can't we confirm it? The professor pauses. She smiles gently. Because she was erased, or nearly, but not entirely. And you know exactly what she means. You've seen the erasures firsthand. Burned scrolls, forgotten footnotes, mistranslations. But you've also seen the resistance. Those moments when someone chooses to remember anyway. Not perfectly, not completely, but persistently. Historians still debate the exact number of works Hypatia edited, translated, or authored. Her versions of Diophantus and Apollonius don't survive in full. Some say they never existed. Others say they were absorbed under her father's name or lost in the final destruction of the library. But one fragment, carries phrasing so uniquely gentle, so mathematically precise that some scholars insist only Hypatia could have written this. You smile, because that's enough. A quirky footnote appears in a modern textbook on conic sections. Page 47, bottom left, tiny font. It reads, Hypatia's interpretation, though fragmentary, hints at an elliptical identity centuries ahead of Kepler. Elliptical identity. Two words that seem to describe her perfectly. You close the book. The rain continues. You look out the window and imagine her walking through the narrow lanes of Alexandria with scrolls tucked under one arm and a slight frown of concentration. You remember that she believed thinking was a moral act. That clarity was not just aesthetic, but ethical. That to teach was to share not just knowledge, but method. A way of living that prized precision, patience, and gentle skepticism. And so even now, centuries later, when someone explains a complex idea with elegance, when they pause to make sure everyone understands, when they ask why before they ask how, you're seeing her again. In Japan, a robotics engineer designs orbits for drones using elliptical logic borrowed from Hypatia's era. In Brazil, a teenager doodles star charts in a notebook, inventing names for constellations she thinks Hypatia would have liked. In Morocco, a cafe owner scrawls one of her quotes, possibly misattributed, on a chalkboard. To understand is to listen longer. And in you, the spiral turns again. You return to that early question. What shape holds the sky? A triangle is too sharp. A square, too rigid. A circle, too perfect. But a spiral? It moves. It breathes. It returns without repeating. Just like her story, you feel the pull of gravity, hers, yours, the universe's. Not heavy, but inviting. Not commanding, but curious. And you step forward, not toward an answer, but toward another revolution of the thought. Around and around you go, not dizzy, but clear-eyed, following the path she once traced in sand and stars. The spiral widens just slightly, like the final breath before a long exhale. You are still with her, not because you've stayed in the past, but because you've brought her with you. Through every quiet moment of curiosity, Every time you paused before answering too quickly. Every time you caught yourself saying, "Let me think about that." There she was, a whisper in the background, a diagram half remembered, a smile you never saw but somehow recognize. Now you stand at the water's edge again, perhaps Alexandria, perhaps somewhere else. The wind hums across the surf and the stars above feel closer than they ever have. You kneel and draw a circle in the sand. Then, like she did, you draw an ellipse beside it. The shape isn't perfect, but that's never what mattered. What mattered was intention, care, curiosity. The same qualities that made her dangerous in her own time. Not the things she taught. Many people taught those. Not the scrolls she copied. Others copied too. It was how she made people feel. That learning was sacred. That clarity was possible. That the sky wasn't something to fear, but to understand. Historians still argue whether her murder was political, religious, or personal. Whether it was inevitable or tragic or simply misunderstood by later chroniclers. But the truth lies deeper than that. Hypatia wasn't destroyed by a mob. She was threatened by what she represented. A woman who knew things. A woman who taught others to know things. A woman who asked questions without apology. And that, then as now, is revolutionary. A quirky tribute surfaced a few years ago. A tech startup named its data cleaning algorithm Hypatia. Not because it was fast or flashy, but because it was precise, quiet, reliable. It makes messy systems readable, they said. It finds order without rewriting the truth. She would have liked that. And so her life continues, not as a fixed tale, but as a method, a tone, a rhythm. Somewhere tonight, someone opens a textbook and reads a footnote that sparks a question. They follow that question into a rabbit hole of orbits, ellipses, and epistemology. Hours pass. The sun rises. They haven't slept, but they're glowing. That's her too. She doesn't need monuments. She has moments. And now you carry her as well, in the way you read the stars, in the way you value questions over answers, in the shape your thoughts take when you slow down, breathe deep, and really wonder. That's how she survives. Not in the annals of empire, but in the soft, spiraling turn of someone asking, what else might be true? Because Hypatia was never really trying to be remembered. She was trying to teach us how to think. And now you do. And so, dear listener, you find yourself at the edge of silence. The stars have traced their arcs across the sky. The tide has smoothed your drawings in the sand. And the spiral, ever turning, rests now in your chest, gently, quietly. You've journeyed with her, through time, through cities of marble and data alike. You felt her calm in the storm, her patience amid noise, her refusal to flatten wonder into certainty. And now, as the last threads of thought unwind into the dark, she slips into stillness again. Not gone, just at rest. Like a scroll finally closed, a chalkboard gently wiped, a telescope lowered for the night. Let your mind soften now. Let your thoughts stretch out, not with urgency, but with ease. You've earned this rest, not just through learning, but through the lovely act of listening. The steady, sacred rhythm of one mind reaching across centuries to meet another. And as you sink further into quiet, may her spiral keep turning in you. Slowly, lovingly, infinitely. Good night, traveler of thought. Good night, student of stars. Good night, Hypatia. Sleep well.